Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Rodney Durbin and I'll be serving as the moderator for this webinar. Regardless of where in the world you're joining us from, we're glad you're here and we hope that you're safe, your families are safe, your friends are safe, and your colleagues are safe. As you all are aware, ABB, like many of you, is adapting to a very different way of working in the world today. The pace of that adaptation to me has been pretty remarkable. Collectively, the conclusion for everyone seems to be the same, and that is that remote connectivity has quickly become the new norm. Obviously, with that remote connectivity comes the obligation to ensure that we've got security, and that's why we're having the webinar today. We want to share our expertise at a time when it can make a real difference, we think. So ABB, and especially our energy industries business line, has a really important part to play in securing IT and OT systems that operate in industries that are essential. We serve industries that ensure electric power and clean water continue to flow. We provide automation that enables production of fuel needed to move all the essential items like food and medicine. So we see it as our obligation to be accessible to our clients at a time when things are changing pretty dramatically. So with that, excuse me just one moment. Sorry about that, I had to cough. So with that, I'll move into some housekeeping items. I think most of you are probably pretty familiar with webinar controls at this point. But as you see on the screen here, it should look similar to what you see on your screens. Three things we want to mention. First of all, we'll take questions at the end. I'll moderate those questions. So submit your questions via the Q&A box. The chat window has been disabled. All the attendees are on mute, and the event is being recorded and be distributed to you, I think, tomorrow. Next slide. Thanks. So as I mentioned, my name is Rodney Durbin. I'm responsible for digital sales in ABB's industries based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Also on the phone here is Larry Alls. He is our cybersecurity solution architect and is here really to help us with any kind of technical questions that come up. But he's also an expert, really, when you think about program level and policy level consulting. So really a true kind of industry consultant in cybersecurity. And then finally, we've got Dee Kamada, who is our cybersecurity product manager globally, responsible for this business and this product for us around the world. She's prepared what I think is a really good presentation. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dee.
Awesome. Thank you, Rodney. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day to join this webinar. We know your time is precious, so we appreciate it. And like Rodney mentioned, over the past couple weeks, the daily norm for us has all changed. We're all working from home. It's no longer an option, but it's mandated. And those of you that are going on site are taking social distancing measures and drastic steps to ensure the health of yourself and those that you come in close contact with. So that was the motivation for our webinar today. Since remote has become the new norm, there's a huge emphasis on digital products to help us remain productive and continue operations. And naturally, when we talk about digital solutions, implementing cyber practices into our daily life and within systems that support operations is the baseline for allowing us to work remotely and virtually. So in today's session, we'll start with a safety moment, talk through how to identify cyber risk and corresponding minimum controls to mitigate that risk, give you a preview of the ABB developed reference architecture for cybersecurity and some use cases, and then finally give you information about security controls that should be in place to support remote operations. I'll talk for about 30-35 minutes, which will allow us about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. At ABB, we like to start all of our meetings with a safety moment. In light of the theme of cybersecurity, I'd like to talk through a few actions that you can take in your home to protect your Wi-Fi network. So many times when we go into the office or we go to coffee shops or campuses, we see that they've segmented their wireless networks to protect the most critical data. I want to inform you that this is actually really simple to do in your own home. And within your home, I suggest three separate networks. One, a main or primary network for you and your family for key devices such as laptops, iPads. This is where you'd be accessing information related to your work, maybe banking, your email, etc. Secondly, I suggest a guest network. And then finally, a network for your smart devices. So we have smart speakers, smart appliances, thermostats, doorbells, locks. While these devices certainly make our lives easier, they're the devices that are more prone to security vulnerabilities. So segment these to protect your primary network. And then within your primary network, keep the password complicated. Typically, the default password that's given when the network is being set up has a long list of lower and uppercase letters, a mix of numbers and characters. It's pretty challenging to remember. I would say keep this consistent and ensure that it's complicated. And then for your guest network, the password can be simpler so it's efficient to share, but remember to update this frequently. So I hope that's helpful. Now, before we kick off the webinar and get into the content, I'd like to do a poll to understand you guys, the audience. Please take a moment to let me know your cybersecurity experience level. You'll see the options range from beginner, so really just beginning to think about cyber, to expert. I just want to get a gauge for where we're at within the audience. And you'll see here on the screen the different answers, so A, B, C, D, and then also the poll that you should be seeing on your screen. We have about 30 more seconds for the poll to, for the duration of the poll, and then we'll get some answers. So I appreciate you guys participating. All right, I see some answers coming in. We have about 15 more seconds, and then we should be getting the answers. All right, the poll has ended. Just waiting for the results to come in. All right, so as you can see, we kind of have a mixed bag as far as the responses to the poll, and that's okay. I think that, you know, some people heavily focus on cyber while others are trying to figure it out due to our new norm. But I do appreciate you taking the time to take that poll. It also looks like we have a handful of folks that are responsible for cybersecurity, which is great too. So to ground everyone based off of kind of the mixed experience within the audience, I want to take some time to really define what I mean by cybersecurity risk and some basic mitigating controls. Right now, there's heightened focus around the available digital solutions and concerns about cyber risk. When I think about cyber risk, I basically bucket it into two categories: exposure to vulnerabilities and then lack of sufficient controls within a network. Exposure to a vulnerability is typically in the form of malware or malicious software that's intended to cause harm to a system. Some popular forms of hardware include viruses or ransomware and are delivered in the form of phishing attacks or weak controls around device management like USBs. And then weak controls within the network allow for malicious actors to gain access to the network, then penetrate the network layers to perform actions that potentially could impact or stop operations. This cyber risk is brought on specifically because we are connecting industrial control systems to networks. With that, assets may or may not have been designed with security in mind. The lack of security controls or program structure that addresses the people, processes, and technology to establish a security posture may your environment or your organization is susceptible to cybersecurity risk. So really, why does this matter? The first and most important is that it can impact operations. Access to a network could interrupt uptime, and any uptime to any impact to operations can result in reputational and financial loss. Secondly, boards are starting to pay close attention to cyber risk. Cyber risk is being bucketized and evaluated in the broader category of enterprise risk, and the consequences reflect that. And on top of that, board members are being held liable for cyber incidents that occur due to lax cybersecurity controls. And finally, there are many regulatory requirements that act as the primary driver for implementing cybersecurity. At times, these regulatory requirements are enforceable and result in potential fines. And you can see in this example here in the middle right of the screen that there's hefty fines being given for not implementing cybersecurity controls. So I'm sure that we all agree that cybersecurity risk exists, which is why we're on the call today. But addressing cybersecurity risk can be hard. And what I've noticed is there's a clear gap between acknowledging that cybersecurity risk exists and those that take action. So over the past 5 to 7 years, I've worked in several roles in the cybersecurity space, including cyber consulting and product management. I want to share a few themes that I've heard when talking to clients and customers about roadblocks or challenges for addressing cybersecurity. The first one, and probably what I hear most frequently, is there is an overload of guidance on how to approach cybersecurity. There's so many standards that exist. There is lack of clarity on which one to choose, which best to align to. While there are clear front-runner standards like IEC 62443 or NIST or NERC CIP, there are also many other local standards or internal standards that these are built off of. Further, like the digital transformation story, the requirements around cybersecurity keep changing, and so it feels like a moving target. Secondly, manual processes are in place for maintaining basic controls like asset inventory. And when we think about asset inventory, these are all products that have IP addresses or connected to a network. And having this visibility into your network and knowing your assets on the network is a critical baseline for understanding how to protect and how to respond in the event of an incident. Without this capability, it's really hard to address and implement the right controls. And then finally, most organizations receive information from vendors that provide point solutions. These solutions solve one piece of the puzzle when thinking about cybersecurity, and it's not a holistic approach to addressing cyber risk. It's really hard for the team responsible to evaluate all of the products, the cyber products on the market, understand the best tool, understand the order to which to implement those tools. And so that is what brings me to the next slide. I suggest a phased approach that focuses more on cybersecurity capabilities than products to help eliminate the confusion around which products to choose. Maturing your cybersecurity posture takes time. You can see on this slide here that I'm recommending addressing cybersecurity in 3 steps. First, addressing the basics or implementing minimum cybersecurity requirements. Second, once in place, managing those controls in a routine manner. And finally, optimizing your program with experts in advanced operations. I'm not going to read this page to you, but my hope is that you can use this page for guidance on how to approach your cybersecurity program and potentially even use this as a checklist. As mentioned on the previous page, vendors can aggressively push point solutions that kind of leave you reaching for the next shiny object when it comes to cybersecurity. My advice is don't reach for the most advanced solution. By addressing step 1 of this maturity model, you cover the majority or roughly over 70% of your cyber risk by applying preventative measures and limiting your attack exposure. What I mean by this is if you do the basics like patching, backup and restore, antivirus, hardening, event collection, these security capabilities have been around for a really long time and they are still so effective. So please start here. Combined with those minimum cybersecurity controls, cybersecurity risk assessments help you understand your current state posture versus your goal or intended security posture. Then you can round this out by training your resources. This is an excellent start and takes a significant amount of time. From there, it's critical that the basic security controls are maintained on a regular basis, whether that's implementing updates on a quarterly basis or scanning and hardening your baselines monthly to look for variances. Maintaining your baseline is important. And then optimization should only happen once you have these basic controls in place and they're maintained. When we talk about this third step or optimization, we're talking about things like creating a security operations center, whether internal or using an external SOC. And what this does is it supports advanced processes like incident response to threat analysis. But none of these advanced solutions or analysis is possible if you don't first address steps 1 and 2. So this next slide is ABB's portfolio of products and services for cybersecurity. You'll see that our portfolio is structured in a manner that is aligned to the phased maturity approach of implementing cybersecurity. Again, I won't go into each offering, but the point here is that ABB has developed a portfolio to help our customers and clients regardless of their maturity stage. If you have questions about where to start or have a question about a specific portfolio offering, please feel free to reach out to me after this webinar, and I'd be happy to talk to you about those specific needs or connect you to the right person. My point here is that ABB can support you regardless of the stage you are in your cybersecurity journey and can continue to support you from the basics up through advanced security controls. I'd like to shift the focus slightly to what we call the reference architecture for cybersecurity. The reference architecture is a template that guides asset owners on how to set up the network within and add in cybersecurity control points to support the implementation of digital solutions. Before we get into the details, I want to provide some context on the process for developing this reference architecture, since it's something that we at ABB within our cyber team are heavily focused on. Over the past year or so, we've gone through the process of rationalizing the cybersecurity portfolio and saw a further opportunity to simplify and streamline. The cybersecurity needs in our key verticals such as oil and gas, power generation, and chemicals are similar. Prior to this year, each vertical had implemented their own defined version of a reference architecture. To rectify this, we created a group with our top cyber experts from each of the industry verticals. We wanted them to consolidate the best practices and come up with a reference architecture that is both broad enough to address multiple control systems, but detailed enough to be actionable for asset owners and operators. It is a guideline for adding cybersecurity control points into your network to support digital solutions and remote operations. This diagram that you're seeing on the right represents the output of deep and careful thought that went into creating the ABB reference architecture for cybersecurity. So I want to dive into this diagram a little bit more. When you look at the diagram, you'll notice a couple things. Firstly, the reference architecture places all the assets, specifically the cybersecurity equipment of the industrial system, into specific network levels as defined by IEC 62443, so levels 0 through 4, plus a cloud and internet layer. For those of you that are familiar with the Purdue model, you'll notice that the network layers are very similar. The key difference with the IEC 62443 network level definition is the placement of the DMZ and segmenting the DMZ from the operations management function. This reference architecture stresses the need for a north and south firewall to control data flow and prohibits data flow that skips the layer. So it's impossible, example, to go for data to flow directly from level 2 to level 3. It must first bypass level 3. Secondly, if you look closely, you'll notice that there's color coding within the network diagram. This is intentional. It shows where the cybersecurity controls are applied. The reference architecture can be used in two main ways. Firstly, for new projects or greenfield projects, where this model can be the baseline for the new projects, or in brownfield projects as a way to evaluate and determine the remediation work that needs to be done to make a network more secure. To fully leverage the reference architecture, a gap assessment must be completed to understand your current state against the guideline. With this result, you'll be able to identify gaps and prioritize remediation steps according to your risk appetite. Almost as important as understanding what the reference architecture is, you must also understand what it is not. It provides a good framework, but nothing can ensure 100% prevention from cyber attacks. However, what it will do is provide you greater assurance in your security posture. Secondly, while the reference architecture is aligned to the IEC 62443 standard, it doesn't ensure compliance. It's one of the many steps. Therefore, the reference architecture gets you closer to compliance, but it must be validated by a third party before declaring compliance. And lastly, the reference architecture is a guideline and needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. This is where we encourage collaboration between like ABB and our customers. We want to have that conversation with you about the best way to apply security controls. So it may or may not be applicable to apply all of the reference architecture controls depending on your system, your environment, your processes, etc. So quick plug, the reference architecture gap assessment that ABB can perform is simple and can be done in a few hours by our solution architects. So Larry was introduced at the beginning of this call. He's one of our solution architects, and that can be the blueprint for how you address and position and define a cyber strategy in the short term, midterm, and long term. So what are the benefits? I'd like to summarize the benefits of the reference architecture. As control systems become more modern, it's critical to continue to reevaluate the existing network to ensure that cybersecurity controls are efficient and updated and have an updated setup. The reference architecture helps prepare control systems for growing threats to industrial control systems that may have impact to safety, availability, or system resilience. The architecture also aligns to IEC 62443. This is one of the most widely accepted cybersecurity standards, and it defines 4 different security levels, with 1 being the lowest security level and 4 being the highest. As you determine which security level you'd like to achieve, our reference architecture provides guidelines on which controls need to be implemented to reach each one of those security levels as defined within the standard. Next, ABB has documented all of this. So there's a lot of documentation that goes behind this, and it can be used by asset owners. This includes details down to data flows, rule configuration for your firewalls. This can be a huge time savings to you, and can be used in risk reviews, compliance reviews, etc. And then I want to emphasize that cybersecurity has never been the end goal. The goal is to maintain a security posture that gives you confidence to utilize digital solutions, which really enables you to achieve your goal of maintaining operations, and particularly now maintaining operations, especially when working remotely. So this reference architecture kind of gives you assurance that you can implement these solutions and get to these goals with minimal or no impact to operations or your cybersecurity posture. So next, I'd like to look at 3 use cases for the reference architecture. One of them is a remote access platform or a solution that helps you connect remotely. And this is a common requirement for many solutions, especially when thinking about connecting remotely or cloud solutions, etc. We'll dive deeper into this in some upcoming slides that I've prepared. The second use case is security updates. Many people use the Microsoft Dev US service, which is managed online. So getting those updates come from, level 4, but the content and the updates need to be delivered in a secure manner. So with the configuration of that north and south firewall, you're able to have assurance that those updates are getting delivered securely. And then similar to the structure of security updates, the deployment of antivirus updates kind of follows that same path, where there is a checkpoint with the north and south firewalls to ensure that the direction of the data is one directional and that the data is transported in a secure manner. My guess is that most of you joined this webinar because you were thinking about remote connectivity and how to continue operations in a secure manner. So let's talk through that. So there are many solutions kind of on the market that enable remote connectivity. So I want to provide you some guidelines around what to think about when you're selecting a solution that enables you to connect to your system remotely. There are really 3 things to consider. There's the secure data collection and transmission. There are requirements around access controls. And then finally, the ability to have an audit trail and be able to use those audit trails in case there are issues with unauthorized connections to your system. Secure data collection and transmission occurs in the architecture of the solution. Firewalls are placed in several locations that segment the database server from the application server from the customer network. You will see this configuration in an upcoming slide. Secure protocols are used and there are limitations around communication. Additionally, when using a solution that enables remote connectivity, it's important that you, the asset owner or the system owner, maintain the capability to set the access controls, and that configuration of those controls is simple. Examples of this being able to set up and enforce which engineers have access to remote into your system, determining if access must be requested every time they want to remote in or if it's set by role. In addition, there's setting up two-way authentication prior to initiating communication makes a solution that enables remote connectivity a more secure option than, say, VPN. And then finally, the creation and storage of audit logs down to really specific details like when the connection was made, who made it, how long that connection lasted for. It's critical. It's critical that, in case of an incident or unauthorized access, you're able to look back and understand who was in the system and how to respond if there are any concerns. So with this understanding of security considerations for remote connectivity, I'd like to let you guys know about a solution that ABB has to support its customers. So we have a solution called Remote Access Platform, or RAP. It's our secure solution that enables remote connectivity. It's been around for a really long time now, so several years, and it's implemented heavily within our customer installed base. If you tuned into the Tech Talk last week, you heard my colleague John Towsley talk about this solution in depth. However, I'd like to piggyback off of that presentation due to the relevance of this solution today. As we mentioned earlier, few of us are going on site, and those that are taking extensive measures to limit their on-site time. And so there's 3 primary use cases for a RAP solution like the one that ABB offers. One, there's connecting a customer to ABB tech support. Secondly, there's connecting an ABB engineer to the customer site or system. And third, and most relevant right now, is connecting you, our customer, to your systems remotely. So as we're scenario planning and thinking kind of worst case scenarios, while some roles are essential and being on site is critical, We definitely want to limit that as much as possible, but still be productive and continue critical operations. So prior to this pandemic, the benefits were really around the time and cost savings by not traveling and very quickly connecting to ABB engineers and customer sites to either do troubleshooting or support in the manner requested. But now this type of service is essential to enable remote operations for our customers and connecting them to their own sites. So I want to take a minute and basically tie this whole presentation together. This diagram shows the architecture of the wrap solution to the right. So as you can see, as a starting point, we have you and your remote users, and then we have your site or your system. Within the architecture of the wrap solution, there are multiple cybersecurity control points. You can see the firewalls between the database application servers and the communication servers from the internet to the site. We talked about the multiple layers of authentication points, so authenticating to get into the laptop, authenticating to get into the service center, and establishing a connection. When you couple that with the security controls that are implemented in your system by following the guidelines around the reference architecture, what you really have here is an end-to-end secure solution that enables you to continue to work digitally, have remote operations, and have assurance around the cybersecurity controls that are in place. And ultimately, this enables you to meet your goal of being connected, keeping production going, even when resources are dispersed geographically. And so with that, I will open it up to questions on the presentation.